Hi there. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ralph Borland. I'm here as a researcher at HUMA, the Institute for Humanities in Africa at the University of Cape Town. And this is the entire seminar series. I'm in my home in Cape Town Observatory. And I have a very special guest today for this seminar. It's Tapiwa Guzha, originally from Zimbabwe, and a Cape Townian too. I've been chatting with Tapiwa for some time. Tapiwa has an ice cream stand and food place in OBS called Tapi Ice Cream. And I've had many chats with Tapiwa on a range of subjects. And I've been talking to him for some time about doing a seminar at HUMA. And one of the reasons why I wanted Tapiwa to be on the seminar series is because of the seriousness and intensity which Tapiwa applies to food, seeing food as this place at which culture and politics and experience and sensuality intersect. And so in the run-up to this, we shared some links to articles which you could read more about Tapiwa's work. Tapiwa also has a PhD in microbiology from UCT, and he's done postdocs at Stellenbosch. So he's a highly qualified person to work with chemicals and all the constituents of food, as well as having wide-ranging ideas beyond food, and has got very wide-ranging experience in other areas of his life as well. So I'll invite Tapiwa to talk more about what he does. And what we're doing here is we're doing some seat-of-the-pants, improvisational, critical cooking in my tiny kitchen right here in my place. And so Tapiwa is on his camera, and we're going to go to Tapiwa. So Tapiwa, yeah, you've unmuted yourself. I'll mute myself now.
All right. Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody who's decided to share this time with us today. I am going to be speaking a little bit about what I've been trying to achieve in the last few years of existence as a more grown-up adult, shall we say. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background of how I came to being who I am now, and then why I'm trying to do the work that I'm doing. So I grew up in Zimbabwe, in Harare for the most part, and went to a few different boarding schools. And eventually I came to Cape Town, went to UCT, and did about 14 years of studying. So from undergrad all the way to PhD nonstop. And in that time, I was very aware of the fact that I didn't have the luxury of thinking about the world as a bigger thing. I was very individually focused, which is, I think, a factor of immaturity, but also the pressures of always trying to get the next degree, the next assignment, the next exam, or whatever. And in that time, I never really understood why South Africans were so angry around racial conversations, specifically Black South Africans, until I moved to Stellenbosch University, which is also in the Western Cape here, to do my postdoc. And in that time there, I suddenly had a bit more free time to really explore what it means to be Black in this country, and to think about life beyond myself, and to think about humanity and what this experience is like for individuals and communities, and how we can all help each other be the best versions of ourselves we can be in our lives. And in that time at Stellenbosch, a few things happened. The first one being I became aware of the discrepancy around knowledge within the context of the world, and who creates knowledge and whose knowledge and perspective is important. So as a scientist, I had grown up in that field thinking the scientific approach to life is, the one true way, and is the only possible way of expressing ourselves and of getting to a truth as an absolute concept, as opposed to a thing we can always endeavor to add more knowledge to. And at the same time as well, I became a lot more open-eyed around what it means to be Black in this country. And so I decided to leave the academic space because I didn't feel I was serving my needs and the needs of my community. And partly because the research I was doing was focused on growing and improving plants from other parts of the world. So for a lot of South American and European plants, we're trying to make them grow better in the environment of the African context, or continent rather. And it didn't make sense to me that we're putting so many resources into trying to fix something that should really be a problem when we have so many local crops and species from here that have evolved to grow in this environment. And I was feeling a little bit of resistance around this sensibility within that academic space. And also recognizing that this problem is kind of pervasive across different fields, whether it's academics, whether you leave that space, you go into food, you go into marketing, you go into finance, the way we use language, music, textiles, I became really aware of the fact that as a Black person, for the most part, I was living as a European with little sprinklings of my culture on the surface. So from the fact that, you know, we have names for currency in Zimbabwe, but we still say Zimbabwean dollar when I could say Ndoro. From the fact that I sleep on a bed, the toothbrush that I use, the coffee maker that I use, everything that I do every single day is not of this place. And once in a while, we make these allowances to say, okay, let's be Black for Africa Month. Let's be Black while we have whatever African food is meant to be, you know, when the content is so diverse and is such a huge source of different cuisines and different cooking techniques and cultures and technologies. But we've been reduced to this monolith of Africanness as if there's no variety within us. And as much as we are similar, there's also a lot to celebrate about how unique each different clan, tribe, community, region is and can be. So I knew I wanted to leave that academic space, but I didn't know what I actually wanted to do upon leaving it. And so I decided to try my hand at food because I've always been someone who enjoys cooking. I grew up cooking with my grandmother. But the other day I also realized actually when I used to be in boarding school, it was a very bare bones kind of boarding school. So we only had the bare minimum kind of food and the quality was not so great. And we'd all come up with different ways of flavoring our food. So like a plain maize porridge, you'd put in biscuits, tomato sauce, like fruit juice concentrate, other cereal in there, whatever you had, you know, to try and make your own little tasty morsel of breakfast or supper. So actually, I've been thinking about food culture and I've been cooking in different ways for a really long time. So then I decided, okay, let's try ice cream because I enjoy ice cream. And I've been making homemade ice cream for, at that point, about 8 years. And I kept trying to express to people that try some of my ice cream. They're like, but why would I buy ice cream from you? It's so expensive. And I was explaining it's handmade, it's homemade. It's a very different experience. It's fresh and there's no better quality than something that's been made from scratch. And no one was getting it. So I tried a few different gimmicks. And eventually I was in a Zimbabwean restaurant in Cape Town called Pahari. And I saw some snacks from home. Then I was like, well, I wonder what would happen if I put that into some ice cream. So I bought a few of them. I went home. I had baobab fruit, masau, some maputi, that's popped maize, and a fruit called nyi, and some peanuts and orange juice from home. And it's the first time I had ice cream that spoke to me as an African, spoke to me as a Black person. And I realized if I'm connecting so well with this experience, I'm thinking about home, I'm thinking about summertime in the rain, I'm thinking about more than just ice cream. It's not just strawberries. Because to me, ice cream so far is just like pistachio. It's something delicious. There's nothing more to it. So I started thinking, what about other little Black children? Are they getting similar experiences around food? And the truth is they're not, particularly in South Africa, but even across the continent. There's a limited range of what food means to people. So normally people identify with struggle foods, poverty foods. That's our idea of African food. And if you try and talk about ice cream that features baobab, people look at you funny and like, oh, that's that wild fruit stuff. We don't eat that here. You know, there's this aspiration to move away from big Black to European sensibilities that I'm seeing more and more in this space. So I'm getting frustrated. And I was like, okay, I've got it now. I think I'm going to use ice cream to change this conversation. And so I started doing monthly pop-up tasting events. And the first event that I ever did, I did 10 courses of flavors from Zimbabwe. And what I found in that instance, whenever I served a course and I returned back to the kitchen, the conversation that was happening around the table was far more impactful than what I was able to do. People were connecting with some of the flavors. People were from Nigeria, from Burkina Faso, people have nothing to do with Zimbabwe, but they recognize the ingredients and sometimes even the dish. And obviously it makes sense because of Bantu migration, we're all connected. But it was the first time I'm seeing actually there's power in this moment besides feeling good about who you are. We can actually educate each other and celebrate each other in a much more meaningful way. And so at that point, I realized actually I'm onto something. So the next event I did, I used a plant from South Africa, but you get across the continent, it's all called impepo, or Helichrysum petiolare. And impepo is used in a few different ways. You can use it to stuff mattresses and pillowcases. You can burn it as an insecticide. You can drink it as a hypertension kind of medicine. But most significantly in South Africa, it's burnt as part of invoking an ancestral presence in your home. If you want to do some kind of important familial thing, you burn impepo to invite your ancestors to participate in that thing you're trying to do. So I smoked some ice cream with impepo, I made some cake, and people had very polarizing reactions, because one reaction is, why are you corrupting our culture? What are you trying to do? Impepo is only for this sacred gesture. And other people are like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I could do so much more with impepo. And because you're telling me now it's a medicinal plant, you're telling me you drink tea, and later on I'm going to be making cordial with this plant, you know? And that's when I realized people sometimes are stuck as observers of their culture and not participants of their culture. So there's this hesitance to say, I'm here now and I can also contribute to the story. And it's not about disrespecting the past and disregarding the past. It's about saying, those people who came before me did something. What am I doing to contribute to this story? And from then, I'm now trying to, empower people to see the familiar as something new. You can put your own life into it. So on the continent, maize meal is a big deal. And very few people know that maize meal is from Mexico, and very few people understand that we had other grains that were displaced by maize. And very few people will move beyond making ugali or sadza or pap with maize meal, right? So for example, I can do, or even like sampan beans. And I've done at least like 30 different ice cream flavors that celebrate maize on its own. And it's purely to provoke people to say, maize is one thing. Can you do more with it? Can you contribute? Can you be a bit more creative? And so moving forward from that, I started realizing the problem is not limited to food. It's a global issue. It's a pervasive problem. If we look at different technologies from the continent, we disregard it. But if we look at technologies from other parts of the world, primitive, ancient knowledge, it's really celebrated. Like if we're talking like bamboo steamers, clay ovens in Italian cooking, hand-rolled pasta, Korean barbecue, it's all really old, primitive technology that is valued by the people who own the technology and the rest of the world as well. But if we move out of that, we move into fabric and textiles, we move into music, we seem to always be behind the curve in appreciating our own things. And I decided I wanted to change that a little bit more as well. So I started doing other projects beyond the ice cream that provoke experts in respective fields around what they're doing for the culture. So an example that I've got here is we're going to be making some cordial, right? So the concept is still the same. I've got some medicinal plants here I'm trying to share with the world. This is a plant called Confetti buku. It's one of like maybe 16 or 17 species of buku plants in the Western Cape, but people only know about one. And then this over here is brown sage, which people often confuse with impepo. It's a totally different plant species. Again, sage species, there's so many native to the continent. And then we've got some wild rosemary as well. So I started a cordial range of products, and that's just to use drink now to have this conversation. And beyond that, then I realized actually I have issues with African fabric, this idea of one kind of African fabric, and the fact that we still do our fabrics impose on top of Asian or European styles of dress. So we still do three-piece suits and waistcoats and ties and bow ties and belts. And even African fabric itself is not from here. For the most part, it's from Indonesia, it's from the Netherlands. So I then, okay, what do I do about that? can I come up with an idea of making fabric from scratch, using my own style of art? So I do a lot of calligraphy work. So I've done this fabric that's inspired by the armor plating of a pangolin, and it's unique. It's of this place and it means something to me. And I also do beers and like fermented beverages. I do mythology stories through art. So I do calligraphy. And if you had a chance to check out my website, Kashigiro, I do storytelling of creation stories or cosmology stories, because I grew up hearing about Zeus and Hades and Ares, all these Roman and Greek gods, but I know nothing about this place. But there's such a huge history of philosophy and mythology and cosmology, some of which you actually realize is older than the stories that I know, and it has influenced those stories that I would know so well. So I'm trying to use art as well as a way to infuse our identities into every single aspect of what we do, to get to the point where if I can convince other people to do this work, it should be boring. Being African should become a non-factor. We shouldn't be celebrating African ice cream. We shouldn't be having to think about, oh, it's Africa month in September, then you go get something made. You should wake up and not even question whether or not you're African. Currently, we wake up and we're Europeans. And again, as I was saying, we sprinkle on this superficial engagement with our identities. And the ice cream, similar problem. It's a thing that came from Asia, went through Italy and France, America, eventually came here, and then Tapiwa put his little touch on top. It's not getting to the culture. And for me, getting to the culture is now, okay, can I do something more long-lasting? For example, in Zimbabwe, we're losing our ceramic culture because a lot more people are cooking on stoves. So can I come up with a cookware range that celebrates Zimbabwean ceramics, but makes them relevant to a contextual, to a current context that uses electricity for cooking, For me, that's like long-lasting change that touches on a very fundamental thing. Ceramics is an old technology from this place. Cast iron, bronze age things, iron age things. We've been working with metals. We have just at some point lost the ability, or we were silenced to bring the stories along. So for me, I'm trying to get to the very core of, okay, what can we do to rehabilitate the fact that ego on the continent has been devastated? And that's the truth. We don't see ourselves with as much value as we should. And we're not seen by other people in a similar light either, because we ourselves don't have a good esteem as different peoples and as individuals. So ultimately, I've realized the purpose of my work is addressing esteem issues on the continent. How I do that changes from day to day and what I'm trying to do. So sometimes it's sex education, because again, it's a huge problem on the continent. We pretend as if we're not sexual beings. We don't have history of being sexual. And it's taboo to talk about these things. Yet so many horrible things are happening because of that silence. Health and movement, fitness, there's so much we could be doing. And I want to get to a place where I am bored of trying to do African things. I shouldn't be the exception as someone who lives on the continent. I always say to people, we should be tourists in our own cultures. And currently, we are visitors. We don't live in our cultures. So I'm just going to get the cordial going now. Let me just get some water. No, don't worry. No. You can chill. It's easy. It's pretty straightforward. And the cordial came out of necessity. I don't drink, or if I drink, I only drink things that I ferment myself, because I have issues around alcohol in general, but also the history of alcohol in this country and Black and colored people being paid through alcohol and the abuse that came out of that whole system. And so unless I make it myself, I don't typically drink. There we go. Get the gas burner going here. So the cordials allow you to have a more sophisticated tasting drink without having to necessarily have to drink alcohol. It doesn't taste like juice. It tastes like bitter and sour, a little bit spicy. So I'm just gonna pop in maybe about a cup of water, about 250 mils of water there. And then also at the same time, pop in some of these leaves that I foraged near my neighborhood. right? And all that we're doing is essentially I'm making a tea. And once I've made the tea and it's infused, then I'm going to add some sugar for some sweetness. And if you like, you can also add some lemon for some acid in there. And you just let it cook for a little bit. And then once it's cooked, blend in your sugar. And now you got a cordial that you can dilute out with maybe some soda water, tonic water, ginger ale, depending on the sweetness you want to play with. And I don't really have a real recipe to it because I cook it to feel. You can do this with a tea. You can do that with herbs in your garden. We can do that with what you consider medicinal plants from your context, wherever you live. It doesn't have to be any of the stuff that I'm using. Go and forage where you live. Learn about some of your local herbs. Because people think of herbs, they don't think of African food. We always think about like thyme and oregano and cinnamon and all these other things. But so many herbs and herb-like things on the continent, spices that you can be playing around with. All right. So the trick here is to have fun with it. Don't get too precious about it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be the final solution. You know. So I'm just gonna leave that be. Maybe add some more. I suppose I'm leaving some for Ralph here, so I might as well make it a big batch. And so the nice thing about this is I'm a scientist, so I know the plant biology behind why some of the medicinal plants work. And it's an opportunity to teach someone while they're having something as well. You know, food is such a useful way of having conversation because it touches all our senses. It's very easy to remember things if you're having a positive association being created with the memory of the experience itself. I think I'm waffling there. So I'm just going to let that go for a little bit and then speak on my latest realization. I was realizing that this work cannot happen in isolation. I can't be the only person trying to do this. And obviously I'm not. I'm not illusion around that. I am very clear that a bunch of other people are trying to do similar work in different ways, in different fields. But what actually I'm seeing as far more important is we all need to work together in seemingly unrelated ways. So if I think about how I grew up in a creative context. A lot of my family is very creative. And my dad shared office space with a graphic design company. And I used to spend a lot of time in that office. So I learned graphic design from those folks. I learned about theater, performance, and talking from those folks. And I became a scientist, and I'm an artist. I do a bit of sex education work. I do a little bit of movement work. And that's because human beings are a generalist animal. The reason we're so successful on this continent and on the planet, is because we're good at doing so many different things. We don't have to be the best at it, but that combination of who you are as a species is so powerful, yet we spend so much time and effort and resources into developing specialist animals. And that's part of why I left academia as well, is because it wants you to be one thing. All I can be is a scientist. And we end up creating these little boxes that are isolated, that keep each other separate, and we miss on creating community. I grew up in a very communal-based system. Even the language around how I grew up, we don't really have Shona words for cousins, really. We have names for siblings and for uncles and aunts, but everyone in your unit is your family, is your community. Neighbors were tasked with disciplining me and were tasked with parenting me. People who were my neighbors and related to me. And I feel like if we're trying to work together, we should adopt similar sensibilities. In business, I don't really have competitors. I'm trying to work with my so-called competitors because we can make better things. If I get other white businesses to buy into this idea of Tapi Tapi, and they start making their own ice cream flavors to reflect the continent, that's going to change the landscape. It's going to change demand for ingredients, it's going to change farming, it's going to change agriculture, it's going to encourage plant breeding programs. Because currently now, all we farm are things that are not organic, that were brought by colonialists. And obviously, after centuries of breeding, it makes financial sense to keep farming those things. So if we can create a demand from the consumer, regardless of what the consumer looks like, if they're Black, white, Asian, Latin American, whatever, it changes the literal landscape. It rehabilitates the land. We can displace a lot of these grapes and strawberry farms and plum farms and bring back local grains, local fruits. and actively pursue breeding programs that ensure 300, 400, 500 years from now, our agricultural sector looks a whole lot different, you know, and understanding that the work that I'm trying to do and the work that we all can be doing has nothing to do with us right now. It's a legacy, it's an investment in people we will never meet. It's a legacy in animals and other plants and the bacteria and things that are off the continent that were also displaced. It's not only people who were displaced and erased and silenced. So how can we try and work together to that common goal? And one of the examples of a very small thing that I'm trying to do, let me just grab some more of my supplies here. All right, this impepo plant, right? It's a very useful thing for me to explain or to conserve culture. Because of globalization, a lot of us have left our homesteads. I am not going to have children, and some of my partners in the past have been in Zimbabwe. So a consequence of me living in South Africa is I've lost a lot of my little day-to-day rituals around my culture. Part of it is someone washes your hands before you eat. Part of it is you say Pamsoro before you eat. You give thanks to the people who've made the food itself, the people who came before. It's like this big grace moment. I live alone, so I don't do that anymore, right? And what I'm developing at the moment is a little game where it's like a little ice cream tasting ceremony. And what it involves is there's a little ceramic bowl that's based on Zimbabwean pottery. That's where you enjoy your ice cream out of. But within that box as well, there's some paper that I've made with impepo fiber. And you burn that paper in recognition of how impepo is used in South Africa. You wash each other's hands. So I make some soap. Where's my little soap? Yeah. Oh, here we go. So I make some charcoal and impepo soap. And that's a nice way of incorporating hand washing that reinforces the impepo in the ceremony as well. And then you have to say Pamsoro and observe all the rituals around food as well. And what I'm trying to do there is, if I get a stranger to buy into this silly little game, that stranger is saving some of my culture in a very meaningful, tangible way. Because if I die and I haven't had children, and I died in South Africa, some aspect of my culture has died as well. So if I can get Ralph to invest into my culture with this seemingly silly little nonsense game, I've saved some of it. And I've moved it forward as well. And not only just my culture, a few other elements of South African culture. And that's what I mean by community. That's what I mean by it's combined effort as opposed to an individual approach. And I will stop there. I can open up.
Let's I'll pop in here for the first part.
Sure.
And then we'll move to the discussion on my computer. But yeah, thanks very much. What stage are we at with the cooking?
So over here now, we've basically made like a little tea. Let me just decant that out.
I've got some ice in the freezer. Shall I put ice into it?
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Yeah. So now you can see it's taking a little bit of color. And all I'm doing now is I'm going to measure out, how much do we have here? 400 mils. So I'm just going to add an equal amount of brown sugar. And then if you have some lemon juice.
Yes, I have a lemon.
There we go. Easy. Let me just.
Easy lemon squeeze.
Literally. All right.
Yeah.
Let's just put that in there. All right. So this is a very sweet thing, but you dilute it down by like 1:5 ratio, loosely speaking. So it ends up being a nice little balanced dish.
Actually, I've got an actual lemon squeezer here.
Excellent. Just gonna pop in that and give it a little stir. Nice. All right. So, and the reason I chose cordials today is I don't want to do something too fancy, but I want to make this accessible. But also, you don't have to be fancy to actually participate in all of this, right? A few months ago, I was doing a little. In South Africa, there's something called amagwinya. There we go. Thank you. Amagwinya is like deep fried dough, right? Some people call it fat cook or fat cook. Yes, please, yeah. Or mandaza or vitumbua, different cultures. But I did a week's worth of work where each day I made a different kind of fat cook. So some of them were savory, some of them were spice, some of them were filled, some of them were different shapes, some of them were sweet for desserts, and some of them are made into waffles. All to say, it's not that I am some genius who stumbled upon the perfect way of celebrating the content and making ice cream. You could literally do this with anything to achieve the same effects, you know? So I challenge you to figure out in your own context, how can you inoculate a little bit of your own culture into, I know actually do some glasses, some drinking glasses, yeah. How can you inoculate some of your own culture into your day-to-day? You know, something as simple, if you're a medic, can you start bringing in medicinal plants into the conversation? If you're in banking, can you change some of the language you use around banking? If you're in theater, you know, if you're in linguistics, are you coming up with new words for some of these more modern concepts for our children to learn our own languages as time evolves and time moves on, you know? These are just some of the thoughts that I have. Cool. So we're just gonna
small amount of ice.
No worries. So just pop that in and just have a taste of that, Ralph. It's gonna be aggressive. I can promise you.
And then it could be.
Cheers, cheers. And then when right, so that's like really bitter. It's got a very heavy, like tannin kind of mouthfeel to it.
Yeah, it does.
All right, it's really intense. But then when I cut it with some water to actually get it the right concentration, you find it's actually much more enjoyable. Yeah. And then when I move to the other station, let me flip the camera around here.
Well, you can use the camera on my computer.
Oh, fantastic. Cool. All right. I'm gonna pause my video over here. All right. And also mute my mic.
And now we're back on my computer over here.
Yeah. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.
So, just as a disclaimer, myself and Tapiwa are both fully vaccinated, and I've had COVID about 6 weeks ago, and I'm fine and can't transmit it or receive it. So just for anybody concerned about our proximity. But it's a real privilege to have the entire seminar guest right here in the space with me for the first time in the series.
Hey,
yeah,
fantastic.
So good. Yeah, thank you very much for that. We're going to open it to questions from the audience. Let's see. So we can't hear. Any chance to get closer to the mic? If you can. Let's see. Amina, Amina, can you hear us anymore? Any better? Yeah, there's a thumbs up from Babacar. I don't know if there's settings that we can increase the microphone. I've increased the input on the microphone. Yeah. Okay, this is better. We can hear you now.
All right.
Fantastic. So yeah, you didn't miss anything all that important at the beginning. It's a disclaimer. Thanks very much, Tapiwa. So yeah, we're going to open it to questions from the audience, but also as a start, phone is giving feedback. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I mean, something that I guess that really fascinates me in my work as an artist and also as an academic and just generally in my life, I guess, is hybridity. And I think that part of what you're dealing with in your work is hybridity. And I see in the work that you do, and in what I know of you from interacting with you, a great deal of openness. And so without unproblematizing the way you were talking about culture and food, I'm also sort of wanting to foreground that perspective for me as well, which is this interesting way in which food and fabric and culture is also evidence of hybridity. So it's not necessarily that it needs to be either African or European. It's that it can be both. I think that's something that's really, really, really interesting to me. And the example of maize in particular that you brought out of something that's so quintessentially African as like Pup in Southern Africa, or sadza, but actually it's coming from South America and as a result of colonialism, and that in Europe, pasta is very Italian, but actually it's from China, or that wax print fabric is very West African, but actually it's Dutch and Indonesian, as you mentioned. So, I mean, I think that, probably as a white African of European descent, I'm probably interested also from my position in wanting to be, and recognizing that combination of being influenced by where you are, as well as what your culture is from where you came from. So yeah, I'm interested in those elements of hybridity as well.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and it's one that I've dwelled on a little bit. The challenge becomes when it's done without thought, right? Like I'm all for cultures evolve from interaction with other cultures, right? Definitely. But the challenge becomes when one is enforced upon another one. And then the one that's silent is silenced. And then we take it for granted. Then we have a problem. And no one culture is ever going to be in isolation. It's not possible. But I think we can be a bit more active, take active roles in that participation.
Be critical. Because I think what you're highlighting is power. It's like it's and that's why they're not mutually exclusive, being open and recognizing hybridity and also being critical and observing power. And part of the way I've advertised your seminar as a critical cooking class, so I think this idea of critique is really important. So let's turn to our audience, and I see comments and questions from my director Divine. And I'm also inviting comments and questions. So I see Gubela. Are you raising your hand there? I'm going to ask you to unmute. You can unmute yourself.
Yes. I actually enjoyed Tapiwa's talk a lot because it really took me back to one area whereby I actually found people residing in this area, whereby they were actually split into two. One group was calling them the educated people, whereas the other group was called Amaqaba, which in Xhosa is uneducated people. What really encouraged me and drew me to this group of people was how the group that was called Amaqaba, the uneducated ones, was actually very proud that they haven't gone to the formal school and had received formal education. They were really very, very happy that this is the experience that they had actually absolved themselves from. I myself, coming from a Western education and having been told that I must always try to absorb as much as I could in terms of the Western culture and Western education, to really discover people who are like myself, who haven't gone to this formal education, but were very proud of who they are, was really a very important finding for me. And for me as an African, it was as if I am being reborn again in terms of the understanding of myself, that I really, to be me, I really didn't need to go through this formal education. I could just be me and be very proud of myself without this formal education. There's a lot I also learned about this group, especially in regard to food. One of the things they really emphasize a lot was to eat food that actually comes from the earth, that have been grown. For them, when you eat food that is coming from the garden, you are actually eating medicine. You are healing yourself. But when you buy food, you are actually buying poison, because you don't even know where that food is coming from. And that food has been staying in the shelf for quite some time. So there's a lot I can say about this group, but I just want to say, Tapiwa, it was good to actually hear from you, and to also just assist us to understand that in some ways, Africans are like a girl interrupted. And because they are, in terms of their growth and their civilization, it actually was interrupted. And so we need to rehabilitate it. And really, through sharing, we can actually try to rehabilitate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kubela. Do you have any response there, Tapiwa, or?
No, I think she
Yes.
covered it really well. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So Divine is asking, what is food, especially given the ways in which it is entangled with politics, citizenship, and ideas of statehood. Food today, is it what the state offers? Is it not getting sick? Is it not adding weight? Yeah, maybe riffing on the idea of food. That I mean, I guess it's central to what you're doing. Is food? Food is nourishment, and food is also a sign or a.
It's memory, it's celebration, it's pain, it's like remembrance. And for me, food, most importantly, is a neutralizer, or equalizer rather, sorry, equalizer, yeah. It's very hard. No one can exist without food.
Yeah.
And very few people don't know the experience of being mocked at the expense of their food, or because of their food, right? Oh, you guys eat that, or you brought that for lunch, that kind of thing. So people identify with the good aspects of the food experience, but also they know what it feels like to be ridiculed because of what you eat. And if you're eating like cow's hooves, or like taking pap to school with, and people have like sandwiches, or you're Korean and you're bringing kimchi. Yeah, anyone can understand that. Yeah. So for me, food is a good way for healing, physically healing, but also emotionally healing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder. I mean, part of what it makes me think of as well is that I know in the US for African Americans, and also in Africa too, in South Africa, there's also this phenomenon of what were poor foods, which were foods that people ate because they were cheap, and then they were cooked in creative ways to make them more palatable. But they might not be very good for you because they're high in fat, for example. And now there's a continuity, even though there may be for some people more affluence, but there's still this culture of eating these foods that at one time was necessary, but now isn't, but now has this sentimental, cultural, emotional attachment to it. But it may be leading to like obesity, diabetes, heart disease. So I mean, it perhaps provides an interesting counterpoint around culture. Like what culture, as you're saying, is changeable and can be changed, can be critiqued. How does that work?
There's a saying that I heard maybe a year ago, something like tradition is peer pressure from dead people.
Yeah.
I really like that saying, right?
Yeah.
Because just because something is part of your culture doesn't mean it's right. We have things like corrective rape. That's a cultural phenomenon. That doesn't mean it's right. And the food one is also a really good example, because what people often forget when we're talking about those poor cuts of meat, and we're talking about, if you talk about African food in South Africa, you're gonna have like tripe, you're gonna have baby bones, you're gonna have sampan beans, but those things are a small part of the overall story and this overall diet, right? Because for you to have tripe, you should have killed a cow. So who was eating the steak, right? And you know, we are big into cattle herding and sheep herding on the continent. Which again is not an animal from here. So I wish that conversation around cuisine and food can shift to, like, you know, you can eat Sicilian food, and then you can eat Roman food, you can eat Venetian food, and then there's also like generic Italian food, right?
Yeah.
But we started the generic, there's no room to say this is Xhosa food, or if you're Xhosa from this particular clan's kind of cuisine. And those things exist.
Yeah.
You know, because there's not this idea of only the poverty foods that are associated with the general idea of being African food.
Yeah.
That erase all the other sort of expansive potential that we have. Yeah. 100%.
I mean, we maybe have, like in the Cape, Malay food, for example, as a particular, again, hybrid grouping. So Amina is asking, what reconciliations should we have with food? Are there any rituals of forgiveness that must be undertaken with indigenous food?
So for me, it's been important to realize, I mentioned this earlier on, what has happened has happened. There's no changing it. All we can focus on now is moving forward. And part of moving forward is avoiding making those similar mistakes that happened to us, right? So I don't want to be someone who's going to silence another culture and erase other people's cultures because of some resentment or bitterness. I don't have the energy for that, and I'm not that kind of person. For me, is rehabilitation looks like inviting people in. This is a perfect example of what reconciliation rehabilitation looks like to me. Approaching people who have similar values, regardless of their history and their culture and how they look. Are we trying to work towards a similar goal and do something additive as opposed to reductive or that silences someone else, you know? Really, really, really important for me. That's my first stepping point, is always, if I want to work with someone, I think they get what I'm trying to do. Yeah. And we can do this together. Yeah. No matter who they are. Yeah. Yeah. Because actually, I had to close my business an hour and a half early to come to this. And I wouldn't have come if I didn't believe in this. Yes. Because I genuinely am compromising my business for this moment. But I was like, I believe in this thing. I want to go. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you being here. And yeah, I think it's also, you know, it's interesting that we met through food as well, in the sense of through your ice cream shop, you know, and also as the result of conversation over a number of topics, you know. So it's like getting to know someone and then being able to have this engagement. To move from food in particular, as in talking about food, you mentioned earlier about being dissatisfied with the academic space and then wanting to move into something else. So, you know, in a way, what we're doing with this particular seminar is pushing the boundaries of what counts as intellectual work or academic work. And we're saying that the work that you're doing with food, you know, counts as part of that domain. And some people would, you know, place that even in a decolonial context of saying the emphasis on written text is something that needs to also be questioned and subverted. So, yeah, I mean, what has your experience been around that? Your intention to, you know, what dissatisfied you with it? What do you feel you've achieved through going the other, you know, going this route?
I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in the academic space that we tend to be overloads of knowledge, right? And I'm going to speak as a scientist specifically. I was unsatisfied with the delay between I know something new now that I've contributed to the academic world. The person walking down the road will get to it maybe 10 years from now. And by then it'll be likely less relevant. Yeah. Right. So I feel like there's too much of a gap between how we speak and accessible information. If I learn something new, it should be as simple as like, hey, try some of this ice cream. It's made with this plant. Oh, okay, cool. They've learned something new. for me. It's quite I have an urgent need to share that knowledge.
Yes.
In the same way, I'm very keen to learn new knowledge from other people. And I feel academia, the pendulum, not even the pendulum, it's gone in one specific direction that's lost other perspective, because it's its own belief system. We speak of academics and of scientific academics as it's above ideology and dogma, but it's just another dogmatic practice that has pitfalls and blind spots and biases.
Yes.
Yeah. So for me, I wanted to remove myself from that context and see if I can reopen my mind a little bit. Because after 14 years, you tend to end up in that very specific, narrow-minded kind of worldview. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you very much on the immediacy that you desire, for one thing, and that recognition of dogma or doctrine that is there in academia. The science is an interesting aspect of it, because especially right now, there's such a kind of inquiry around science, how to use science valuably. I'm going to turn to some of the questions from the chats. What is the food of the future for the African? Are we looking back to build a future? Is that indispensable as a practice? So this, I guess, past looking and future looking.
Yeah, I think it's never gonna be, and I think that's pointless to try and go back to the way things were. That's unattainable. That's putting a boat up a mountain. It'll just slam you down. I think for me, the future is a lot more deliberate and trying to put in measures in place, whether it's government policy or personal policy, to say X amount of our exports should be things from this place, or X amount of what people eat in their homes should be things from this place. And this place not meaning Africa, this place meaning where you are.
Yeah.
So we talk about eating locally, sustainable eating all the time. But most of the time on the continent means eating colonial things locally.
Yeah.
So for me, it's how do we regain some of that literal land retail, but also emotional and mental retail, to say, let's keep, the wheat is good, let's keep some of that. The wine, someone else can make the wine, we can ferment sorghum. That thing, can we find some kind of compromise and balance, because it's unavoidable that globalization means people want to try all sorts of different exotic things from around the world, but we shouldn't do that at the loss of the local things. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting how something like permaculture is, and there's that permaculture center in Harare, and permaculture is a kind of, I guess it's picked from a lot of different traditions around the world agriculturally to create a way of farming that's sympathetic to the land. And I guess when you're talking about food and where the food comes from, there's also ways of questioning large-scale farming and commercial farming and small-scale farming and permaculture as a way of rehabilitating the land and all of those concerns.
This is a hilarious part for me, when I think about people talking about ecology and sustainable living and permaculture and like responsible practices. I try and avoid glorifying the African state, right? But we had a lot of things going on that were really amazing. That
in Zimbabwe,
I mean, just in general, go anywhere in the world, people have systems in place that are pretty amazing. Whoever shows up then ends that system. So now you've got this situation where specifically like Black Africans are now catching up to this whole organic thing and sustainable thing. A practice that was here all along that was stopped. And then now it takes the people who stopped that practice to bring it back. And now we're playing catch up again. So for me, it's like, we need to get to that point without having to wait for someone to make it okay for us or to gentrify it for us. To say,
gentrify it.
Okay, I give you permission to go back to your ways.
To make it cool again.
Exactly.
You got to do it before it's cool.
Exactly.
So there's a question here about the histories of pre-colonial African culture as being mainly written, and asking about the difficulty of finding histories that are oral histories. I guess the asker Mutisia Leonard is posing that challenge of he's asking for help, and he's saying how can we I guess, see or get in touch with histories that haven't gone through that process.
Yeah, that's for me, the way I've decided to look at it is I've embraced the whole continent. Right, because again, I'm a journalist, right? Some people would choose to say, I want to learn about my specific story as a quote-unquote person, right? That involves, okay, we're in Zimbabwe now, but we must have come from the migration. If now poetry talks about Buruso, which is the big grass, which is the savannah, and Tanganyika,
the Bantu group,
right.
Group.
So for me, it's accepting that part of it is going to be a global or a bigger view of the continent in terms of tracing back. So there are a lot of resources around, a lot of authored works, written works that have managed to capture some of those stories. But also a perfect example, I've been encouraging a friend of mine to do a podcast with a grandma, where she just records whatever her grandmother is saying.
Yes.
You know, like if we're making efforts to capture all this knowledge we're at a very specific moment where a lot of people are dying, who are going to be the last people to have that knowledge. You know? So if we are making efforts to record some of that information without any purpose but to record it, that alone is quite powerful. You don't know what you're going to need it for. You don't know how relevant it's going to be. So if you have the time and the capacity, get it audibly taken down. Because a lot of the written stories and written histories are based on missionaries who took an interest in those stories, but obviously they put their own little spin into it, and they changed the nursery rhyme or they changed the little parable to make it fit a certain narrative. So even those written works that we can access now are impure. Yeah. In the same way, oral tradition is impure as well. You told me the story, I go pass on the message to someone else, then suddenly 3 millennia later, we've got a whole new thing. You know, So it's unfortunately, there isn't much we can do about it not being written down. But fortunately, a lot of it echoes in different tribes and different parts of the continent. Because this amazing thing, sorry, sidebar everyone, I'm part of a genetic study at the moment. I was the donor for the genetic material, where we're looking at how can we make medicine for the whole world that is not biased against Africans. Right. So currently medicine is based on European genetics, but European genetics are a subset of African genetics, right? So if you understand African genetics more and the diversity within it, whatever will come up as solutions for medicinal problems based on continental information will apply to anyone, right? So it makes me think of how if you go talk to someone in Benin right now, like someone from the Fon people, they're going to have some aspect of your mythology within that mythology, because we came from that side. Right. So some people have done a better job of holding on to the oral histories, and we'll never get a perfect story again, but if you can plug in holes by consulting with different people. At the moment, I'm trying to do, I'm trying to do like, there's something in science called a phylogenetic tree, and it's basically showing the relationship between how things are related to each other, living organisms, right? So if you take me and my brother, closely related, me and my cousin, less related, and the tree becomes less and less close to the original source, right? So I want to do a phylogenetic tree that compares how language for specific foods has moved across the continent, and also how use of this food has moved across the continent. And I suspect there'll be an overlay of two trees that are quite similar with how the language evolved as people moved and how dishes evolved as people moved. And if you can then maybe use that to find the source for where things came from. Let me stop.
That's good. So I think it's especially something there in and earlier on in response to Mutisia, which is perhaps you can contribute to the archive of oral history by recording people who can contribute to it. Also, Tapiwa was talking about areas in which oral history is strong, as in, I'm thinking of like in Mali, or the Griots, for example, and that tradition. And yeah, I'm very interested in the genetic study that relates to our Carnegie-funded strand at HUMA, which is looking at AI in healthcare in Africa, and also has those issues around who AI considers, as the target, and where the data comes from. So we're going to be wrapping up just as we're at the end of our seminar session, but we can end with one a question here from my colleague Babacar, who also organizes the entire seminar series with me, and he'd like to hear Tapiwa comment a bit on the relation between African food and urban city settings. Kumbela has mentioned the joys of picking herbs from around the neighborhood. Is there anything as such in neoliberally planned cities in the global megapoles of the South? It sounds a bit like nostalgia about African food of bygone times. Yeah, I'm thinking a bit of the sort of the food desert that characterizes some African cities, but yeah.
So that's a huge thing to try and tackle, as more and more people make a point to leave all the spaces, all the land that we can use for farming, or are moved because of mines and big scale agriculture. And in my cafe space, outside the cafe space, I've got, you've seen them, I've got these little wooden milk crates. And inside I put black bin bags, and I put some soil inside, and I grew some plants. And I did it on top of concrete, on the street. And I did it as a point when I opened the cafe to say, sometimes it's not about having a bumper harvest. Sometimes it's about providing a little bit of something for yourself, right? Even if you don't have access to land that's arable, you can at least grow your own herbs, maybe have one harvest of a tomato plant, get 6-7 tomatoes out of it. It's about the practice of doing that kind of thing. Should your situation change, right? Should you suddenly have access to land, what you'll find often is people have access to really fertile land, but for the most part, they're growing ornamental plants, right? And then you drive down the road to go to Woolies or Pick n Pay to go buy food, and people get angry when someone's picking their fruit from their mulberry tree by the gate, like, stop stealing my fruit. I'm like, but you're never gonna eat all that food, you know? So the people with access to urban land, who have productive land that's producing fruit, it's as simple as collecting fruit and putting outside, give people permission to enjoy that fruit, because you will never deplete that supply. And something as simple as growing your own herbs, almost anyone can grow herbs, because their very nature, they're sturdy, hardcore plants that thrive under neglect, especially if you're talking like in the Cape area. Fynbos just does not care about life. It just lives, So it's difficult, and I recognize the limitations we have around urban setups and how to deal with that problem. But also community gardens are a thing, and asking for allocations of land from the city. Like if we can allocate land to Amazon to build a warehouse, surely we can allocate land to feed people.
I also think it's really noticeable that in Zimbabwean cities, like any available piece of land is cultivated, like in the city. The side of the road, you're growing maize in it. And then you have reports in South Africa recently of someone getting, fined by the municipality because they planted food crops outside, the cabbages outside their house.
Yeah, it's wild, but you got this perfect little lawn that's like kikuyu grass, that's thirsty as hell, that's just like depleting resources as well.
I mean, I think that's a big problem in South Africa, is that with the so-called world-class city narrative, where that means not looking like an informal kind of African city. That's another idea of a European or global vision. So I'm just going to move I'm going to read a few congratulatory messages, and then we're going to close this session. So David May says, let's move forward, use what we have, lessons have been learned, now we do it our way, and well done, Tapiwa. And Kudzai says, well done, Tapiwa, this is very important work that you're doing, really inspiring. And Norma Rudolph is commenting that in Finland, people hang baskets on their fence and put their excess harvest for others to take. That's great, thank you. So yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks very much, Tapiwa. That's been it's been a great session. Thank you, and thanks for your time. And I'll be seeing you back at your ice cream stand.
Post haste.
And if anybody, everybody else who's in Cape Town, you stop by Tapi an observatory right next to the bookshop. You can combine your books, your coffee, and your ice cream. And yeah, thanks to Humor, my institute, where I'm a researcher. Thanks to my director, Divine. Dara Kell in New York is saying, thanks to Tapiwa, that was amazing. Can't wait to try your ice cream soon. Yeah, you will be. And next week is Rachel Spronk from University of Amsterdam speaking at the next Attire. Same time next week, Thursday. Thanks everyone for attending this this very special edition.
I just want to say thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the time. It is not lost on me that there's so much you could be doing with your life, and for this hour and a little bit you were here. And thank you, Ralph, for inviting me, and Yuma for having me as well. Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm hopeful and I'm happy to have been here. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.